I'm just turning it on. So we're live streaming on also on Facebook and on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So I'm just gonna have a quick look. So I'm gonna copy that link. Okay. And I'm gonna make sure that we're streaming okay. So yes. Just tested Facebook. Facebook is okay. I'm testing LinkedIn. Yep, we're okay on YouTube. Tested Facebook. Facebook is okay. Okay. And last but not least, on Twitter. All right, looking good. Okay, so thank you for joining us, HCJ.tax. For those who are new, we do this every week. So if you have a look on our website, hcj.tax/events, you can see what the topic is each week. So the topic is slightly different each week. And we're open to suggestions. If there's an area that you want us to dive into and we haven't been doing it, just send us a message. That's okay. We'll definitely be guided by what you guys want to explore. For those who are repeats, good to see you again. So, right, okay, great. So we're good. Just for the sake of clarity, so we're going to talk about topics related to tax. We're going to talk about nomad tax, digital nomads, location independent entrepreneurs, remote workers, whatever the term is, more or less the same thing. But please be advised that we're not giving advice. What we're doing is we're having a general conversation about general principles. The idea is that you're going to walk away equipped with the concepts needed to engage with your preferred tax team. Again, this is not advice. You can look at it as entertainment. You can look at it as education, but it certainly is not advice. We legally, because we're licensed, we can't give advice, right? Without knowing the full facts, which could never be gleaned in a couple of minutes over Zoom or over social media, right? This is being recorded for those of you who are joining on Zoom. If you do not want your image to be captured, it's simple, keep your camera switched off. We invited you to submit questions in advance. Thank you to those that did, to those that did not. Feel free to type in the box below. You can type below whether you're in Zoom or on YouTube or whatever. And we'll get to them in the order in which we receive them. For those who are asking, yes, everything is being recorded and it'll be available on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, basically wherever you get your preferred podcast. So without further ado, let's just jump in. So first question to Joe is asking, has there been any updates on the US moving to an RBT system? I'm assuming, Joe, you mean residence-based taxation. There have been, and there will continue to be challenges, whether it's politicians posturing or legal, legal positions being adopted or legal action being taken and whatever. But the long and short is, I doubt that will ever happen. I know there are people who are strongly advocating the opposite. Maybe they have political motives. We're not into politics. We just call it like we see it. If it is, you actually take a step back and look at what's going on the macro level, not just in the US, but globally. The tax landscape is obviously evolving, right? And more countries are actually moving towards global reach. Transparency is now the norm. The days of being able to hide are long gone for those who take this seriously. And yeah, and then a lot of countries, especially the wealthier countries, are looking for tax as a means of plugging holes in their balance sheets, which have been caused by a lot of factors, including the health crisis that we've been going through over the past couple of years. So there's a need for revenue collection. There's a movement to seeing data as super important. When you look at the U.S. tax code in particular, with international taxes, it's less about revenue collection and it's more about data collection. We know this because when we look at the penalties that are applied, weirdly enough, the harshest penalties are for non-disclosure of international positions, transactions, investments, as opposed to not just paying your taxes. So if you don't disclose some sort of bank account you may have overseas, it may be up to 50% of the unreported balance per year, plus interest, plus penalties, plus possible jail time. So it's civil and criminal. So I don't think that that's going to unwind. I don't think the US is going to unwind their position. And more importantly, when you look at other countries, they may be following suit. A lot of typically the US and another country called Eritrea are the only two countries in the world which have citizenship-based taxation, but increasingly a number of wealthy countries are saying, and not even wealthy countries like the Europeans but other emerging markets are also saying there are circumstances where even though you've left your country of citizenship, there may be fallback rules that would apply, and you still maintain their reach. You're still within the reach of that tax net, even though you no longer reside there. So situations where you could have severed tax residency before are no longer being allowed. And this is a trend that we've been seeing for decades now. And therefore, I don't think the world is suddenly going to reverse track, and I don't think the US is going to either. There's no political mileage in it. There's too much to be gained by continuing in the present trajectory. Sorry to be the conveyor of bad news, Joe. Moving on. Okay, this is an interesting question. Which is the best passport? So for those who are internationally mobile, you have the opportunity to pick up residence in many countries, and an increasing number of nations, jurisdictions want to attract remote workers, location independent entrepreneurs, want to attract nomads, and they incentivize you to do so with various visas, incentives around long-term residency, as well as potentially citizenship. So there's that. And then, of course, there is the investment migration programs, where you can, if you have the funds and it's a good fit for you for what you're looking for, it's also an option in many jurisdictions. So which is the best one? Obviously, that depends. I'm not selling residency. I'm not selling citizenship. We help people make that decision, especially from a tax perspective. We help people with pre-immigration planning and pre-expatriation planning. So if you're leaving certain jurisdictions, we can help you. But we swim in our lane, which is tax, right? So we have no dog in this fight. But in terms, if you define best as a passport which will give you access to many of the more popular jurisdictions, at least from a Western perspective. And of course, everyone is unique, right? Depending on what kind of business you're in, what you're into. But I think Ireland is really a strong contender right now, because Ireland is part of the common travel agreement or area with the UK. So even though the UK has left the EU, there is still freedom of movement between the Republic of Ireland and the UK. And of course, Ireland is part of the EU. So there's freedom of movement within the EU with an Irish passport. So it is probably one of the strongest travel documents. Of course, you have relatively easier access to the big English-speaking countries, Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand. So yeah, I think that is, probably would be my vote. But of course, everyone's situation is different. You need to speak to someone who will understand your situation inside out and can advise you accordingly. Next question. Where should I set up an offshore company? We get this all the time, like every week we get that question asked. And I think, I was talking to another tax advisor. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, when we were doing a live stream on Australia US taxes, and we just chit chat with my Australian counterpart, and we're thinking, what is it? Is it the movies? We think it's like the media that gives this impression that, hey, if I get an offshore company, I'm going to be able to save so much money and whatever. No, that's not the way it works. Maybe historically, up until maybe the early 80s, that was potentially an option. There was decided tax advantages, and then there was super privacy. But now, in the age of transparency and the modern tax rules that we have, and the modern banking rules that we have, many of those so-called advantages are gone. So as to where you should set up an offshore company, it really depends. It really depends. If it is that you're trying to hide, then you can try. I'm sure, unfortunately, there are less reputable, unlicensed professionals who tend to not be in any regulated jurisdiction. So they won't be in Western Europe, they'll be in Eastern Europe, they won't be in Singapore, they'll be somewhere unregulated nearby. They won't be in North America, they'll be in Central and South America. So they don't have to worry about regulation, and they play fast and furious with the rules, and that's a choice you can make. But we believe that that's not long-term thinking. What you need to do is we need to understand what is your overall strategy, what is your business model, what type of investments you have, and whatever. So if it is an opportunity for asset protection, I think, yeah, asset protection, and it maybe sometimes offshore structures would work in that situation, or maybe for better compliance, and maybe for some tax optimization. So it may be there may be cases where, first and foremost, a structure must have commercial benefit, because most advanced economies have anti-avoidance rules. So if you set up a structure just for the purpose of evading tax or avoiding tax, or perhaps under some circumstances reducing tax, more times than not, anti-avoidance rules kick in, and the structure can be challenged. So there must be an overriding commercial benefit to a structure that may or may not involve an offshore company. And then if secondary to that, there is a tax benefit, then yeah, I mean, tax optimization can be thrown in there. But if it is you go into a situation saying, hey, how can I, minimize my tax without being conscious of the commercial benefits and the anti-avoidance rules and the management and control rules, then you're probably going to get in trouble in the long term. Right after that advisor takes your money and does whatever it is you think you want done, and they disappear into the sunset and stop answering your calls and your emails, that's when the tax offices start knocking on your door. So just by having a company in another jurisdiction doesn't necessarily mean that the substance of the overall transaction changes, because you may still, especially if you're the key decision maker, you're running that company from wherever it is you're located. So even though it's incorporated elsewhere, there's something called place of effective management, or management and control rules, or permanent establishment rules, or nexus rules. There are lots of terms used to describe the same thing, that you create a taxable presence by where you are as a key decision maker, where your key decision makers in your team may be. So I would say the question, where should I set up an offshore company, may not be the best one, but it should be, here's my business model. How can I optimize my business model for commercial reasons, asset protection reasons? I may have some IP that I want to protect, to provide better customer service, or to be more tax efficient, and better able to comply with certain local rules and jurisdictions in which you play. So that's my thinking. Sorry, I know that's not what you want to hear. Moving on. Someone's asking about inheritance taxes in Portugal. Right, okay. I like that kind of question, because it does show like long-term strategic thinking. I could see that this person is a thinker. Not that other people aren't thinkers, but this person is really thinking longer term. If you're thinking in terms of what is gonna, I mean, we're all getting older, right? So at some point in time, you think about what is happening to your assets that you built over your working life. Or on the other hand, if you, for those with parents that are getting older, there's your parent situations or friends or siblings or whatever. So you may be conscious that, hey, it's not the most exciting topic, but it needs to be thought about. So in Portugal, like in many jurisdictions, there are kind of inheritance taxes, but they do get particularly complex. At least we had some questions on that, I think a couple of weeks ago, last week or the week before, when we did a live stream on Portugal taxes. And you can find all the previous live streams on hdj.tax, or if you could just go to YouTube and look for hdj tax, and you can do a search and it'll pop up. So it was asked quite a few times by some people. So, just that longer term perspective. So it is, to answer your question, it is relatively complex. Yes, it does exist, but it depends. It depends on, what the assets are, whether it's Portugal status or worldwide, where you based, obviously, and who's it going to, because there are different rules for if it's going to like a friend as opposed to direct descendants like kids or your spouse, your surviving spouse. So there are different rules that would apply. So it is something worth sitting with an estate planning team who is experienced and qualified in the jurisdictions in which you do have exposure. For the most part, those jurisdictions that have estate planning or estate taxes, they are just that. So even though nominally they may be termed an inheritance tax, it's actually not a tax on the person who's the beneficiary, who's receiving it, but it's on the estate of the person who's passed away. I think one of the notable exceptions, at least in the developed world, would be Ireland, where there is a genuine, I believe, inheritance tax. And again, we do live streams on Irish tax as well with Damien. So again, you can have a look at hdj.tax for that. But so Ireland aside, so I'm thinking about the UK, I'm thinking about Europe, obviously North America. You're looking at taxes on the estate. So whoever the executor, the administrator of your estate, or the estate in question, that would be part of their responsibilities for filing tax returns and making sure that everything is settled before it goes on to whoever the beneficiaries are. In addition to which, for those who are thinking strategically, which as I say is a good thing. In the last couple of years, there's been an OECD report on wealth and inequality. And yeah, so basically there seems to be consensus among the OECD nations. So these are basically a grouping of the wealthy countries. And they are really conscious of the fact that, hey, income inequality is growing, and they're looking at so-called inheritance taxes as well as wealth taxes as a way to address it. So from a policy position, using it as a way to address this metric. Yeah, I mean, we have judgments as to whether that's a good thing or bad thing, whether it's double tax or triple tax or whatever the case may be. But hey, it is what it is. It is a reality and something that you need to factor into your forward planning. So I think it's Warren Buffett who says something to the effect that you should leave your kids with enough so that they can do anything, but never leave them enough so that they can do nothing. So I think that is really informing some of the thinking there. So again, something to think about in your forward planning as you choose the right team to help you work through that. Next question. Seizing passports. Yeah, so someone's asking I guess you're asking, from you American, and the idea that it's true. It's not a rumor. If it is that you have you owe taxes, there is now a connect between the Treasury Department, which a part of which is the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, as well as the State Department, which is responsible for passports. So there are circumstances if you have a tax liability above a certain amount and you're not in touch with the IRS and you're not trying to deal with it, you're trying to, they can't reach you, or that you don't want to be contacted, you're non-responsive, then they can issue some sort of directive or order so that you have problems with your passport. So we have had clients with that situation.
Darren, you are mute.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. So apologies for the disconnect. In Monaco in the French Riviera, which in principle is a nice thing, but I'm having problems with the internet in my hotel. So I do apologize. Let me make sure that I'm still connected on the other platforms. So on Facebook, on YouTube, and whatever. So it appears as if I am. Okay. What I'll do is I'll turn that off. And I need to